What's the most toxic thing your family tried to normalize? I was at my family home for Thanksgiving dinner when I felt the bruises on my rib cage aching. My sister Millie gasped, "Oh my gosh, what happened to you?" Mom rushed over, but not to help. "Let me see." And before I could react, she pressed her fingers into my side where the bruising was. "See, Millie? Elena knows how to keep her husband happy." "Mom, she needs a hospital," Millie said, reaching for her phone. Mom slapped it out of her hand. "Absolutely not. What kind of wife runs to strangers every time her husband disciplines her? Elena knows better." I tried to sit but cried out as pain shot through my spine. "Mom, please. It really hurts." "Good wives endure," Mom said, locking the front door. "We're having Thanksgiving dinner as a family. You'll sit there and smile and show everyone what a devoted wife looks like. Won't you, sweetie?" I nodded because that's what I always did. Family started arriving. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. I tried to smile and greet them, but the pain was getting worse. Every inhale felt like broken glass grinding inside my chest. "Elena, honey, you look terrible," Grandma said, reaching out to touch my forehead. Mom walked behind my chair and dug her thumb into my shoulder where another bruise was hidden. "Tell them, Elena. Tell them how happy Harry makes you." He makes me very happy," I managed to say through gritted teeth. "Louder," Mom demanded, pressing harder. "He makes me very happy," I said, tears streaming down my face. Aunt Julie frowned. "Eleanor, she's sweating, and she's so pale." "The heat from the kitchen," Mom said dismissively. "Elena's been helping me cook all day. Haven't you, dear?" I hadn't, but I nodded anyway, sending another spike of pain through my ribs. A weird bubbling sensation started in my lungs. "Elena, serve the turkey," Mom ordered. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. Mom yanked me upright by my injured arm. "Show them you're not an embarrassment to this family. Walk properly." I made it to the turkey, hands shaking as I tried to lift the platter. The weight was too much. Pain exploded through my torso and I dropped it, turkey sliding across the tablecloth. "Elena!" Mom's face went red. "How dare you ruin Thanksgiving!" She grabbed my wrist where Harry had left fingerprint bruises and squeezed. "Apologize to everyone. Now." I'm sorry, everyone," I gasped. "I'm sorry for ruining dinner." As I sat, she leaned close to my ear. "You're disgusting. Can't even serve a simple dinner. No wonder Harry has to teach you so often." Each breath was shallower than the last, like breathing through a straw that kept getting smaller. "Elena's not touching her food," Aunt Deb noticed. "She's watching her figure," Mom said. "Harry likes his women thin." That's when the coughing started. Deep, wet coughs that sent knives through my ribs. I tried to suppress them, but they kept coming. Then I tasted metal. When I pulled my hand away from my mouth, it was covered in blood. Millie jumped up. "She's coughing up blood!" Our cousin Maria, the nursing student, went pale. "That could be internal bleeding. She needs an ER immediately." "Everyone calm down," Mom commanded. "Elena just has a little cold." "Don't you, sweetheart?" She walked over and slapped me on the back, right where the worst bruising was. "Stop being dramatic. You're embarrassing me in front of the family." I tried to answer, but only coughed up more blood. The room was starting to spin. I could feel something wet in my lungs, like I was drowning from the inside. "Aunt Eleanor, if her ribs are broken, they could puncture her lung," Maria said, standing up. "This is serious." "Are you a doctor?" Mom snapped. "No? Then sit down." She turned to me. "Elena, tell Maria you're fine. Go on. Use your words like a big girl." The room tilted sideways. I collapsed face first into my plate, gasping like my lungs were punctured. "Elena!" Millie screamed. Mom tried to pull me upright. "Stop this performance right now. You're embarrassing me." Through my fading vision, I saw Millie grab a chair and smash it through the dining room window. Glass shattered everywhere. "Stop her!" Mom shrieked. "She's ruining everything!" I woke up 3 days later in the ICU. The doctor said I'd been clinically dead for 4 minutes. 4 minutes where my mother kept insisting I was just being dramatic, while my lung collapsed from a punctured rib. Mom couldn't look at me. She just kept saying, "Good wives endure," and I was protecting your marriage, over and over. But Millie knew the truth. Maria knew. Every family member at that Thanksgiving dinner knew. And we were going to make sure she never hurt another woman again. The ICU machines wouldn't stop beeping and every sound made me jump. I tried to understand what the doctor meant when he said I'd been dead for 4 minutes. My chest tube pulled with each breath and hurt so bad I wanted to scream. Through the glass doors, I could see Mom in the hallway waving her arms at anyone who would listen. She kept pointing at my room and shaking her head like this was all some big mistake. Millie stood between her and the security guard with her arms crossed. The guard kept nodding while Mom's face got redder and redder. She tried to push past him, but he blocked her path. The doctor came in holding a clipboard and pulled a chair next to my bed. He showed me the x-rays on his tablet and pointed to white lines all over my ribs. 3 were broken clean through and 1 had gone into my lung. He traced his finger over older breaks that hadn't healed right, some from months ago. His voice stayed calm, but I saw his jaw tighten when he asked how long this had been happening. I tried to answer, but my throat felt raw from the breathing tube they'd pulled out. Millie grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard enough to hurt. I managed to whisper that Harry did it, and the doctor wrote something down. He asked more questions about the old injuries, but I could barely get the words out. Millie stayed with me after he left and told me everything I'd missed. She said when I collapsed at dinner, she knew I was dying. My lips were turning blue and I wasn't breathing right. Mom kept saying I was faking it while blood came out of my mouth. That's when Millie grabbed the dining room chair and threw it through the window. Glass went everywhere and Mom started screaming about the mess. But Millie didn't care because the neighbors heard the crash and called 911. The paramedics had to push Mom out of the way to get to me. 2 police officers showed up while I was still sleeping off the surgery. They were nice, but I felt naked telling them about Harry. One was older with gray hair and kept calling me ma'am. The younger one took notes while I talked about Harry hitting me. I told them about the bruises on my ribs and back and wrists. But when they asked about Thanksgiving dinner, I couldn't say what Mom did. I just said there was a medical emergency and left it at that. Maria came to visit the next day with a notebook in her hand. She sat on the edge of my bed and held my other hand while Millie watched from the corner. Maria said she wrote down everything that happened at dinner. She had times and who said what and when Mom stopped people from calling for help. She saw Mom press on my bruises and dig her thumb into my shoulder. She heard Mom say good wives endure while I was coughing up blood. Maria said she'd tell the truth no matter what the family thought. My phone buzzed with a voicemail and I recognized Mom's number. Her voice came through the speaker calling this whole thing unnecessary drama. She said I was embarrassing the family and needed to stop being so dramatic. She said Harry was worried sick and just wanted his wife back home. My hands started shaking and I couldn't stop them. The shaking got worse until my whole body was trembling. The nurse came running when the monitors started going crazy. She gave me something in my IV that made everything feel fuzzy and far away. That night when everyone was gone, I pulled out my phone and started typing a message to Harry. My fingers moved on their own writing that I was sorry for causing problems. I stared at the words for a long time before deleting them one by one. Even lying there with a tube in my chest, I still wanted to apologize to him. The next morning, a woman named Claire Noel knocked on my door. She worked for the hospital's domestic violence program and had a folder full of papers. She sat down and explained protective orders and emergency shelters and financial help. She didn't push or tell me what to do, but just laid out all the options. She showed me websites and phone numbers and places that could help. Everything she said felt huge and scary, but also like maybe there was a way out. Claire came back the next day with more paperwork about protective orders. She asked if I wanted to file one against Harry, and I tried to say yes, but my voice came out as a whisper. She had to lean in close to hear me say it again. The thought of going to court made my stomach hurt, but thinking about Harry finding me was worse. She said she'd help me through the whole process and wouldn't leave me alone with it. The discharge planner showed up with a list longer than my arm. I needed follow-up appointments with the surgeon and lung doctor and regular doctor. No lifting anything over 5 pounds for 6 weeks. Careful movement to avoid pulling the incision open. Watch for fever or drainage or trouble breathing. Take antibiotics 3 times a day and pain medicine every 4 hours. Physical therapy to help my ribs heal right. I felt broken listening to all the ways I needed to be fixed. Millie walked in while the discharge planner was still talking and said she'd already set up her spare room for me. She'd bought extra pillows for my ribs and moved everything low so I wouldn't have to reach. The discharge planner asked where I'd be staying and I pointed at Millie, which made Mom's sister texts start buzzing on my phone immediately. Aunt Julie was already spreading the word that I was choosing my sister over my husband. The texts kept coming while Millie helped me into a wheelchair, each one calling me selfish or dramatic or saying I was destroying the family. My phone rang and Detective Dean Bailey's name showed up on the screen. His voice was calm and professional when he said he needed to schedule a formal interview once I felt stronger. He said there was no rush and we could go at my pace, but the prosecutor wanted my statement as soon as possible. I agreed to meet him next week and hung up feeling sick about having to tell everything again. Millie drove me to her apartment in silence while I held my ribs with every bump in the road. She'd cleared out her entire guest room and set up a small table with water bottles and my medications already organized by time. The bed had 4 pillows arranged to prop me up, and she'd even put a bell on the nightstand in case I needed her. That first night, I woke up screaming about drowning in my own blood. My lungs felt full of liquid again and I couldn't breathe. Couldn't stop coughing even though nothing was there. Millie ran in and held me while I shook and sobbed and neither of us went back to sleep. She just sat there rubbing my back while I tried to stop seeing Mom's face over me at the dinner table. The next morning, a delivery guy knocked with a huge bouquet of red roses. The card said, Harry loved me and wanted me to come home. That he was sorry things got out of hand. Millie took pictures of everything with her phone before carrying the whole thing to the dumpster outside. She said we needed to document every contact attempt for the protective order. Claire had given me a folder full of papers before I left the hospital. Legal aid pamphlets and therapist referrals and domestic violence resources all stacked together. The phone numbers felt impossible to dial, but Claire had circled the most important ones in red pen. I forced myself to call legal aid first, and a woman answered asking basic questions about my situation. My voice kept getting quieter as I explained I needed help with a protective order and maybe a divorce. She scheduled an intake appointment for the following week and said to bring any documentation I had. Then I dialed one of the therapist numbers Claire had marked. The receptionist was kind, but I could barely get the words out about needing trauma therapy. She said they had an opening in 2 weeks and took my information while my hands shook holding the phone. Each call felt like running a marathon, but I made them anyway because I had to. Millie sat next to me on the couch that night and told me what she saw at Thanksgiving. She said she watched Mom dig her thumb into my shoulder and saw my face go white with pain. She knew when I started coughing blood that I was dying. Actually dying right there at the table. She said my lips were turning blue and Mom was still insisting I was being dramatic. Breaking that window was the easiest choice she ever made. Even knowing it meant Mom would never forgive her. She didn't care about the family war because saving my life was worth any price. I couldn't sleep again that night because I kept feeling Mom's thumb in my shoulder, her fingers pressing into my ribs while she smiled at the family, the way she yanked me up by my injured arm to serve turkey. I realized she wasn't just letting Harry hurt me, she was hurting me too. She was pressing on bruises and grabbing injuries and causing me pain on purpose. The thought made me run to the bathroom and throw up. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria saying she was writing out her full witness statement. She was including every detail about Mom stopping people from calling 911 and pressing on my injuries. She said she was scared of what the family would say, but staying quiet would be worse. She'd already talked to 3 other cousins who saw everything, and 2 of them agreed to give statements too. Claire called the next day asking to meet for a risk assessment. She came to Millie's apartment with more forms and sat across from me asking about Harry's patterns. When did the violence usually happen, and what triggered it, and had he ever used weapons? She asked about Mom too, about whether she'd hurt me before or just enabled Harry. She showed me statistics about lethality indicators and helped me identify which ones applied to my situation. We made safety plans for different scenarios, like if Harry showed up at work or found out where I was staying. She helped me think through escape routes and safe people to call and what to pack in an emergency bag. The whole conversation felt unreal, like planning for a war I never signed up to fight. The next morning, Claire came back with more forms and sat across from me asking harder questions about specific times Harry hurt me. My hands shook as I described each incident while she wrote everything down in careful handwriting. She asked about the worst time, and I told her about 2 weeks before Thanksgiving when he threw me into the bedroom wall. She asked if anyone saw it, and I shook my head because it always happened when we were alone. Then she asked me to say exactly what happened without using words like accident or misunderstanding. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. My throat felt tight and dry. Claire waited without pushing while I tried to force the words past whatever was blocking them. Finally, I said it out loud for the first time without making excuses. Harry hit me. The words felt like broken glass in my throat, but also like something heavy lifting off my chest. Claire wrote it down and asked me to say it again louder. Harry hit me. Then again. Harry hit me. Each time got a little easier until I could say it without my voice shaking. She had me practice saying it different ways, like Harry punched me in the ribs, and Harry grabbed my wrist and twisted it, and Harry pushed me down the stairs. By the end, I was crying, but the words weren't stuck anymore. 2 days later, Detective Bailey came to Millie's apartment with a thick folder of papers and evidence bags. He spread everything out on the coffee table, including photos from the hospital and witness statements from Thanksgiving. He pointed to each piece of evidence and explained how it showed a pattern of abuse and family enabling. The medical records showed 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung, plus old fractures that never healed right. Maria's statement described Mom pressing on my injuries and stopping people from calling 911. Millie's statement covered breaking the window when she saw me dying. He had statements from 2 other cousins who saw Mom hurt me and prevent help. No. He even had a report from neighbors who heard screaming from our apartment 6 months ago. Bailey said he was building a strong case, but warned me these things take time and Harry would probably get a good lawyer. He also said Mom's role made things complicated because proving she caused harm by preventing medical care was harder than proving direct violence. But he was going to push the prosecutor to consider charges against her too. The next week, 2 officers came to take me to get my things from the house I shared with Harry. They said he wasn't home, but we had to be quick in case he came back. I grabbed clothes and important papers while one officer stood by the door and the other helped me carry boxes. That's when Mom's car pulled up outside, and she came running toward the house screaming. She yelled that I was destroying the family and ruining Harry's life with my lies. She said good wives don't run to the police and I was embarrassing everyone. The officer had to step between us when she tried to grab me. She kept screaming about how I was ungrateful and dramatic and attention-seeking. She said Harry loved me, and I was throwing away a good marriage because I couldn't handle normal discipline. The officer told her to back up or he'd arrest her for interfering. She screamed that she was my mother and had a right to talk sense into me. I grabbed the last box of my things and got in the police car while she pounded on the window yelling that I'd regret this. That night while I tried to sleep at Millie's, I kept thinking about Mom in her own kitchen. I could picture her sitting at her table telling herself she did nothing wrong. She'd be convincing herself that she was protecting my marriage by not calling 911. She'd say teaching me to endure pain would make me stronger. She'd believe that good mothers prepare their daughters for the reality of marriage. The worst part was knowing she really believed it all. She wasn't pretending or lying to herself. In her mind, she was being a good mother by teaching me to accept whatever Harry did. That genuine belief made it worse than if she knew she was wrong and did it anyway. The next day, I was going through old boxes from storage when I found a journal from before I married Harry. I opened it and started reading entries from 5 years ago. There were pages and pages of things Mom said that I'd written down. Men need firm hands to guide them. Crying just makes them angrier. If you upset your husband, you deserve what happens. Never tell outsiders about private marriage matters. A good wife takes whatever her husband gives and thanks him for caring enough to correct her. Reading it now made me sick because I could see how she prepared me to accept abuse long before Harry came along. She planted these ideas in my head when I was young and kept repeating them until I believed them. Every entry showed how she shaped me into someone who would let a man hurt me and think it was normal. Claire came over that afternoon to explain the court process for getting a protective order. She sat with me and Millie and went through each step of what would happen. First, we'd file the papers, then get a temporary order that would last 2 weeks. Then there'd be a hearing where Harry could contest it. and I'd have to testify about the abuse. She warned me that he'd probably fight it and hire a lawyer to make me look bad. Even if the judge granted the protective order, it was just paper that wouldn't physically stop Harry from coming near me if he really wanted to. She was honest that the system had limits and couldn't guarantee my safety. But she said it was still important because it gave police a reason to arrest him if he violated it. It also showed a legal record of the abuse for the divorce. She helped me understand that I needed to use every tool available, even if none of them were perfect. While we were talking, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. She'd forwarded a message from Harry that said he missed me and wanted me to come home. Her added message said, "He misses you, sweetie, and you should stop this nonsense and go back to your husband." I showed it to Claire and Millie, and we took screenshots of everything. Claire said this showed they were working together to get me back under control. She said to save every message and voicemail because it could all be evidence. Millie pulled out her phone and played me a voicemail Mom left her that morning. Mom's voice was angry and mean as she called Millie a homewrecker who was poisoning me against my husband. She said Millie was jealous of my happy marriage and wanted to destroy it. She accused Millie of filling my head with feminist garbage and turning me against my family. She said when I came crawling back after Harry found someone better, Millie would be to blame. We saved the voicemail, and Millie said she was keeping everything in case we needed it for court. 3 days later, I had my appointment at Legal Aid to meet with George Price about divorcing Harry and getting a protective order. I could barely look at him as I sat in his office trying to explain why I was there. My voice kept getting quieter as I told him about the abuse and Thanksgiving and being in the ICU. He didn't interrupt or ask lots of questions at first. He just took notes and nodded while I talked. When I finished, he treated me like a client with a problem to solve instead of a victim to pity. He asked specific questions about finances and property and how long we'd been married. He explained the divorce process and what I could expect at each stage. George looked through all the evidence I brought, including the medical records and police reports and witness statements. He spent a long time reading the hospital documentation about my injuries and how I'd been dead for 4 minutes. He said the medical records from Thanksgiving were powerful evidence that would be hard for Harry to dispute. But he warned that Mom's interference made things complicated legally. He explained that while what she did was wrong, it was harder to prosecute someone for preventing help than for causing direct harm. The prosecutor would have to prove she knew I was dying and chose not to help, which was different from assault charges. He said she could potentially face charges, but that decision wasn't mine to make since criminal cases were brought by the state, not victims. He'd focus on the divorce and protective order while the prosecutor handled any criminal charges. He said we had a strong case for both the protective order and divorce based on the evidence. We scheduled another meeting for the next week to file the papers and get the process started. 2 days later, I sat in Whitney Dodson's waiting room with my hands shaking so bad I couldn't hold the water cup she'd left for me. The office smelled like vanilla candles and had soft chairs that made my ribs hurt less, but I kept looking at the door thinking about running. When she opened her office door and smiled at me, I tried to stand but my legs wouldn't work right. She came over and sat in the chair next to me instead of making me move. She didn't say anything for a while, just sat there breathing slow and steady until my breathing started to match hers without me thinking about it. When we finally went into her office, I sat on the edge of the couch ready to bolt. She asked if I wanted to talk about why I was there, but I couldn't get any words out. My throat felt closed up like when Mom's thumb was pressing into my shoulder. Whitney showed me how to press my feet flat on the floor and count 5 things I could see, 4 I could hear, 3 I could touch. My breathing got slower as I counted the bookshelf, the plant, her diploma on the wall, the tissue box, the clock. She said we didn't have to talk about anything hard today, just practice being safe in the room. At the next session, Whitney had a big piece of paper where she started drawing circles and arrows while I talked in broken sentences about Mom and Harry. She showed me how Mom saying things like "good wives endure" when I was little made my brain ready to accept Harry's fists as normal. The circles connected Mom's words to Harry's hands to my broken ribs in a pattern that made me see it wasn't random or my fault. She drew more arrows showing how Mom trained me from childhood to think pain meant love, that suffering meant being good, that staying meant strength. Looking at that paper with all the connections mapped out made me cry so hard I used up half her tissue box. She didn't try to make me stop crying or tell me it would be okay, just sat there holding space while I fell apart. Later that week, I had to call my job about extending my medical leave. The HR woman asked gentle questions about whether I felt safe returning home and if I needed any accommodations. I gave vague answers about a medical emergency and recovery time, terrified she could hear in my voice what really happened. She said to take all the time I needed and that my job would be waiting, but I could tell she knew something was wrong by how careful she was being. After I hung up, I threw up from the stress of trying to sound normal. Detective Bailey called the next morning to say he'd gotten all my hospital records and met with the prosecutor about charges. He said the medical evidence was strong, especially the part about being dead for 4 minutes, but warned that family violence cases were always complicated. The prosecutor was interested in charging Harry with assault, but wasn't sure about charging Mom since proving she prevented help was harder than proving direct harm. Bailey said he'd keep pushing, but couldn't make promises about what would happen with Mom. 3 days after that, Grandma called asking to meet at a coffee shop. She looked older than at Thanksgiving, with dark circles under her eyes and her hands shaking as she held her cup. She told me she'd suspected Harry was hurting me, but didn't want to interfere in my marriage because that's not what her generation did. She said she was sorry, but when I asked if she'd testify about what she saw at Thanksgiving, she shook her head and said she couldn't go against Mom in court. She kept saying family stays together and handles things privately. I left feeling more alone than before, knowing even Grandma would choose Mom over my safety. Meanwhile, Millie was working on Aunt Deb, who finally admitted over the phone that she saw Mom hurt me at Thanksgiving and hadn't slept well since. Millie recorded the call where Deb described seeing Mom press on my bruises and stop people from calling 911 while I was turning blue. Deb said she was torn between family loyalty and doing what was right, but the memory of me coughing up blood haunted her. She said she might be willing to write a statement, but needed time to think about testifying. The next shock came when I tried to buy groceries and my card got declined. I called the bank and found out Harry had emptied our joint account and canceled all my credit cards the day after I got the protective order. 8 years of marriage and I suddenly had no access to any money. The financial control I'd never recognized before hit me like another punch to the ribs. I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot having a panic attack about how I'd pay for food or gas or anything. Claire met me at a Starbucks and helped me apply for emergency funds for domestic violence survivors. She had a folder full of applications and walked me through each one while I tried not to cry from the shame of needing charity. She reminded me that economic abuse was part of the pattern, that Harry taking the money was another way to control me and force me back. She helped me apply for food assistance and emergency cash funds, and even a grant for crime victims. It felt humiliating, but she said surviving wasn't shameful. A week later, a thick envelope arrived from Harry's lawyer. The letter inside described our marriage problems as a simple disagreement that got out of hand, like we'd argued about what to watch on TV instead of him breaking my ribs. His version claimed my injuries just happened somehow, maybe from falling and that I was exaggerating everything for attention. Reading his lies about how he never meant to hurt me, and how this was all a misunderstanding, made me finally see he would never take responsibility for anything. He even suggested I was mentally unstable and needed help instead of a divorce. That same day, Maria spent hours writing her formal statement for the police. She included exact times and specific details about Thanksgiving, like how Mom slapped the phone from Millie's hand at 3:47 p.m. and how she pressed on my bruises at 4:15 p.m. while family members watched. She wrote about Mom preventing multiple people from calling 911, even as I turned blue and stopped breathing. She described the wet sound of my breathing and the blood on my hands, and Mom saying I was being dramatic while my lung was collapsing. Maria's statement was 8 pages long with medical observations about my symptoms indicating internal bleeding and respiratory distress that Mom ignored. 2 days later, I drove to Mom's house because I needed my birth certificate and social security card for the legal paperwork. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel as I pulled into the driveway where I'd parked hundreds of times before. I knocked on the door and heard her footsteps coming closer. She opened it just a crack and stared at me through the gap. "What do you want?" she asked. I told her I needed my documents from the filing cabinet in the basement. She opened the door wider but stood blocking the entrance with her arms crossed. "You're dead to me unless you go back to Harry and fix your marriage," she said. I tried to step around her, but she moved to block me again. I explained I just needed my papers and I'd leave. She shook her head and said those documents belonged to a daughter who knew how to be a good wife. I tried to push past her, and that's when she grabbed my side right where my ribs were still healing. The pain shot through me like lightning and I stumbled backward, gasping for air. She squeezed harder and said this was nothing compared to what I deserved for destroying our family. I pulled away and ran to my car while she stood in the doorway yelling that I was worthless. The next morning, Detective Bailey called to say he'd interviewed Harry at his lawyer's office. Harry claimed I was making everything up and that he'd only pushed me once in self-defense when I attacked him. Bailey said Harry couldn't explain why defensive pushing would cause broken ribs and a punctured lung. Harry kept changing his story about what happened that day, first saying I fell down the stairs, then saying I ran into a door. Bailey was writing down every contradiction and building a timeline that showed Harry's story didn't match the medical evidence at all. That night, I woke up at 2 a.m., feeling like I was drowning again, just like at Thanksgiving. My chest felt tight and I couldn't catch my breath and the room was spinning. I remembered Whitney teaching me to count 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear. I focused on the lamp, the dresser, the window, the doorknob, the ceiling fan. I touched the sheets, the pillow, my phone, the wall. I heard cars outside, the heater running, my own breathing getting slower. It took an hour of counting and breathing and reminding myself I was safe in Millie's apartment, but I got through it without calling anyone. The next week, Whitney spread papers across her desk showing every time Harry hurt me over 8 years. We marked each incident with dates and what triggered it and how bad the injuries were. As we worked, I noticed Mom's voice was there in my head after every beating telling me good wives endure. Whitney helped me see how Mom programmed me from childhood to accept pain as normal. We spent the session sorting which thoughts were really mine and which were Mom's toxic messages planted in my brain. She had me write 2 lists, one of my actual beliefs and one of Mom's programming, and seeing them side by side was shocking. George called that afternoon to say he'd filed all the paperwork for a temporary protective order against Harry. He explained the judge would review it, and we had a court date for next Tuesday at 9 a.m. My hands shook as I signed each page, knowing this made everything official and real. George said the medical records from Thanksgiving were strong evidence and Maria's statement helped too. He warned me Harry would probably fight it, but we had a good case. Millie came over that weekend to help me get ready for court. We practiced what I would say when the judge asked questions and planned where we'd sit in the courtroom. She helped me pick out clothes that looked serious but not too formal. We went over the timeline again and again until I could say it without crying. She took 3 days off work to be there with me and said keeping me safe was more important than any job. My phone kept buzzing with texts from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. They said I was tearing the family apart and should handle this privately without involving courts. One cousin said I was being selfish, and another said I was embarrassing everyone. I blocked their numbers one by one, and each time I hit block, it felt like cutting another rope that tied me to my old life. Claire came to Millie's apartment to do a practice run of what Harry's lawyer might ask me in court. She pretended to be his attorney and asked if I was lying about my injuries for attention. She asked if I had mental health problems and if I was trying to get money from Harry. She twisted my words and made me sound crazy and vindictive. It was brutal, and I cried twice during the practice, but Claire said it was better to be ready than surprised. Tuesday morning came and we drove to the courthouse early to avoid running into Harry. As we walked down the hallway toward the courtroom, Mom came around the corner. She looked right at me, then threw me like I wasn't even there. My body remembered her fingers digging into my bruises and pressing on my broken ribs. My legs got weak and I had to sit on a bench until the shaking stopped. Millie held my hand and reminded me to breathe while Mom walked past us without a word. Later that day, Bailey called with news about the investigation. He'd found records of a 911 call from our neighbors 6 months ago reporting screams and crashing sounds from our apartment. The call log showed they heard me crying and begging Harry to stop. This proved the Thanksgiving beating wasn't the first time and supported everything in my timeline. Bailey said this evidence would help both the protective order case and the criminal charges against Harry. George needed more evidence for the hearing next week, so I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos. Millie had been taking pictures of my bruises for months without telling me, sending them to herself from my phone when I wasn't looking. She showed them to George now. Dated photos of purple fingerprints on my arms, dark bruises across my ribs, a black eye I'd covered with makeup for work. Looking at them spread across George's desk made my stomach hurt because I remembered making excuses for every single one. Harry was stressed from work when he grabbed my arm that hard. The black eye happened because I moved wrong when he was trying to talk to me. The rib bruises were my fault for not listening the first time. George took copies of everything and added them to our evidence folder that kept getting thicker. Tuesday morning came fast, and we drove to the courthouse at 7 to avoid running into Harry in the parking lot. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, just a regular room with wood panels and uncomfortable benches. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely hold the water cup Millie gave me. The judge came in at 9 and Harry was already there with his lawyer, both of them in nice suits looking calm and normal. When my name got called to testify, my legs felt like jelly walking to the witness stand. The judge asked me to explain what happened, and my voice came out tiny and scared. I told him about Harry hitting me, about the bruises, about Thanksgiving when Mom pressed on my injuries and wouldn't let anyone call for help. The judge asked more questions and I made myself answer each one even though I wanted to run away. Harry's lawyer stood up next and started asking if I was making this up for attention. He said maybe I was confused about what really happened. Maybe I was mentally unstable. Maybe I just wanted money in the divorce. I stuck to the facts and pointed to the medical records showing I was dead for 4 minutes. He kept pushing, saying I was exaggerating, but I had the evidence right there in black and white. Bailey took the stand next and went through his whole investigation step by step. He showed the 911 call records from the neighbors, Maria's written statement about Thanksgiving, photos of the crime scene at Mom's house with blood on the dining room floor. Millie testified about breaking the window to save my life while Mom kept saying I was being dramatic. The evidence kept piling up on the judge's desk, even though Harry sat there shaking his head like none of it was true. Mom was supposed to appear, but her chair stayed empty the whole time. The judge looked through everything for what felt like hours before he finally spoke. He granted the protective order for 2 years and said the case would be sent to the prosecutor for criminal charges. He warned that criminal cases take a long time, sometimes over a year, but the protective order started right away. Mom stormed out of the courthouse when she heard the decision, and Harry's lawyer said they would appeal everything. That afternoon, I went to look at apartments with the emergency housing voucher Claire helped me get. The first 3 places were too expensive even with assistance, but the 4th one was a tiny studio above a pizza shop that I could afford. The walls were thin, and you could hear every car that drove by, plus the heat barely worked and the kitchen was just a hot plate and mini fridge. But Harry didn't have a key, and that made it perfect. I signed the lease right there and got my own keys for the first time in years. Whitney saw me for therapy that week and said I was showing clear signs of PTSD from everything that happened. She explained we would need to work together for a long time to process all the trauma, not just from Thanksgiving, but from years of abuse. She set small goals for me, like getting through one day without a panic attack instead of expecting me to suddenly be okay. We practiced breathing exercises and she taught me how to ground myself when flashbacks started. My first night in the apartment was rough because every sound made me jump. A car door slamming had me checking the locks again. Someone walking up the stairs made my heart race. The pizza shop closing at midnight sounded like someone trying to break in. I checked the locks 3 times, then 3 more times, then pushed a chair against the door just to be sure. Eventually I fell asleep on the mattress on the floor, and even though I woke up scared twice during the night, I also woke up safe. Nobody was there to hurt me or tell me I was doing something wrong. George called the next day to explain what happens next with the legal stuff. The divorce would take months to finalize, maybe 6 months or even a year depending on how much Harry fought it. Criminal charges against Harry could take even longer, and he was honest that Mom probably wouldn't face any charges, because prosecutors rarely go after people who enable abuse, even though what she did was criminal. It wasn't fair, but that's how the system worked. Monday came and I had to go back to work part-time because I needed money and my medical leave was ending. Walking into the office felt like everyone was staring at me even though they probably weren't. People asked careful questions about where I'd been, and I just said medical leave and changed the subject. One coworker pushed for details, but I was getting better at boundaries and just repeated that it was medical and personal. My desk felt strange after being gone so long, but at least it was normal and boring, and nobody there wanted to hurt me. That night, Millie showed me her phone, and the family group chat was going crazy with everyone taking sides about what happened at Thanksgiving. Some cousins said Mom was just trying to help, while others said she should have called 911 when I was coughing blood. Uncle Pete wrote that families should stick together no matter what, but Aunt Julie replied that watching someone die wasn't family loyalty. The messages kept coming faster and meaner, with people calling each other names and bringing up old fights from years ago. Millie typed that she was done with anyone who thought letting me die was okay, and then she left the chat completely. She looked at me and said, "Losing half the family was worth keeping me alive." 2 days later, a card showed up at my apartment with Mom's handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a Bible verse about wives submitting to their husbands, and at the bottom she'd written, "Good wives endure," just like she always said. My hands shook as I took a photo of it for George to add to the evidence file. Then I held it over my kitchen sink and lit it with a match, watching her words turn black and curl into ash that washed down the drain. The next week, I was getting ready for bed when I saw headlights moving slow past my window. I looked out and there was Harry's truck creeping by, almost stopping right in front of my building before driving away. My fingers shook as I dialed 911 and told them about the protective order violation. The cops found him 3 blocks away and arrested him, but George called the next morning to say he'd made bail already. The paper from the judge couldn't actually stop Harry from coming near me. It just meant he'd get in trouble after he did it. Claire asked me to come to a support group meeting that Thursday night at the community center. I sat in a circle with 8 other women and listened to them tell stories that sounded just like mine. One woman's mom had told her that divorce was a sin while her husband broke her arm. Another woman's family said she was being dramatic when she showed up with a black eye. Hearing them talk made me realize I wasn't crazy or weak or making too big a deal out of things. Maria kept texting me even though her mom and other relatives were pushing her to take back what she said about Thanksgiving. She was trying to study for nursing exams while getting calls from aunts saying she was destroying the family by telling the truth. But she sent me messages every few days saying she wasn't changing her story no matter what, because doing the right thing mattered more than keeping relatives who protected abusers. My phone kept buzzing with messages from cousins and aunts I barely talked to before all this happened. They called me selfish and said I was ruining Mom's life over nothing. One cousin said I should forgive and forget like a good Christian, while an aunt said I was breaking Mom's heart by not going back to Harry. I blocked them one by one until my contact list was way smaller, but everyone left actually cared if I was safe or not. A month later, I had to drive past my old neighborhood to get to a doctor's appointment and decided to go by my childhood home. The dining room window Millie broke to save my life had been replaced with new glass that sparkled in the sun. The house looked exactly the same as always, like nothing bad had ever happened there. I kept driving without stopping because that place where Mom hurt me and almost let me die wasn't home anymore, and never would be again. 3 months after that Thanksgiving, I sat at my little kitchen table and opened the journal Whitney suggested I keep. I wrote that breathing didn't hurt as much anymore, though my ribs still ached when it rained or I moved too fast. Harry's trial was still months away, according to George, and Mom wouldn't speak to me at all, according to Millie. But I had my own keys to my own door and my own bed where nobody could hurt me. I had my own voice to say no and to tell the truth about what happened to me. The protective order was just paper, and the divorce wasn't final, and Mom would probably never admit what she did was wrong. But I was alive when I shouldn't be, and getting stronger every day, even when it didn't feel like it. I closed the journal and made myself dinner on my little hot plate, then watched TV shows Harry never let me watch, and fell asleep without checking the locks more than twice. Thanks for wandering through all of this with me. It's been really interesting sharing these moments together. I'll catch you next time. Subscribe for more content like this.